By 1921, the Great War was no longer being fought with guns and artillery. The trenches were empty, the battlefields quiet, and the world had officially moved on. Yet beneath the surface of this so-called peace, World War I was still alive in memories, in ruined nations, and in the lives of those who had survived it. 3 years had passed since the armistice of 1918, 2 years since the Treaty of Versailles. On paper, the war was over. In reality, 1921 was a year of unfinished suffering. Across Europe, the scars of the war were impossible to ignore. In northern France and Belgium, entire regions were still uninhabitable. The land was filled with unexploded shells, shattered villages, and poisoned soil. Farmers worked carefully, knowing that a single mistake could still cost them their lives. The earth itself had become a silent battlefield, refusing to forget what had happened. For former soldiers, returning to normal life proved harder than surviving the trenches. Men who had lived for years under constant danger now faced a different kind of struggle. Many were unemployed. Others worked jobs that felt meaningless compared to the intensity of war. Nightmares followed them into sleep. Sudden sounds brought back memories of explosions and gas attacks. There was still little understanding of trauma. Society expected them to be grateful, strong, and silent. In Britain, war memorials continued to rise in towns and villages. Names were carved into stone, sons, brothers, fathers, entire generations lost. In 1921, families gathered for remembrance ceremonies trying to find closure. For many, it never came. Women carried a heavy burden into this new decade. Millions of widows struggled to raise children alone. Many had taken factory jobs during the war and were now pushed back into poverty or domestic roles. Mothers aged early, weighed down by grief. Children grew up hearing stories of fathers they would never meet, their lives shaped by absence. Germany in 1921 stood on the edge of collapse. The consequences of defeat were growing more severe. Reparations demanded by the Treaty of Versailles placed enormous pressure on the economy. Inflation worsened. Savings disappeared. Hunger became common in cities and rural areas alike. Political violence erupted in the streets as extremist groups battled for control. Former soldiers, angry and disillusioned, gathered in paramilitary organizations. They felt betrayed by politicians and humiliated by the terms of peace. Though the war had ended, resentment burned hotter than ever. The foundations of future conflict were being quietly laid. France, though victorious, was far from healed. Large parts of the country were still rebuilding. Railways, factories, and homes lay in ruins. The cost of victory was measured not only in money, but in lives forever altered. Veterans with missing limbs walked the streets. Hospitals remained crowded with wounded men years after the fighting had stopped. France demanded strict enforcement of the peace terms, fearing another German attack. Trust between nations was fragile. Fear, not forgiveness, guided many decisions. Beyond Western Europe, the world remained unstable. New nations formed from the collapse of empires struggled to survive. Borders drawn after the war ignored ethnic and cultural realities, leading to tension and violence. In Eastern Europe and Russia, fighting continued in various forms. Civil wars, revolutions, and uprisings claimed millions of lives even after World War I had supposedly ended. In 1921, the League of Nations existed, but its power was limited. It promised cooperation and peace, yet lacked the strength to enforce its decisions. Many hoped it would prevent future wars. Others doubted it from the beginning. Culture and thought were changing forever. Writers and poets who had survived the war rejected old ideas of honor and glory. Their works described despair, disillusionment, and loss. The world no longer believed blindly in progress or heroism. A generation questioned everything their parents had taught them. Art became darker. Music became more reflective. The war had reshaped the human spirit, yet even in 1921, hope had not completely died. Children were growing up without knowing war firsthand. Cities slowly rebuilt. People laughed again in cafes and theaters. Veterans formed communities, sharing stories only they could understand. Humanity was wounded, but it still searched for meaning. The year 1921 stood at a critical moment in history. The world could learn from the catastrophe of World War I, or repeat it. Peace had been declared, but it was fragile, built on unresolved anger and fear. The choices made in this uneasy calm would shape the decades to come. History would later reveal the truth. World War I did not truly end in 1918. It echoed through 1920, and in 1921, it continued to shape the world quietly, dangerously, and relentlessly. This is the true story of 1921, a year without battlefields, yet full of consequences. A year of survival, memory, and warning. Because the war was over, but its shadows still ruled the world.